This is ChangeMakers with Katie Goar, finding the right solutions for the affordable housing community.
Today's changemaker is Shaina Fite, the public housing manager with Yardi. Today, we're going to look at what happens when housing authorities stop pushing paper and start moving people in homes faster. Shaina has spent the last decade helping agencies modernize their systems, including efforts that have delivered over $200 million in rental assistance. So, Shaina, welcome so much to the podcast.
Thank you, Katie. I'm so happy to be here. I appreciate it.
I am thrilled to have you because a lot of times we talk about policy, we talk about people, we talk about subsidy layering, but now we get to talk about the process. So, welcome. This is a great inclusion. It's fitting that you're here on the ChangeMakers platform. So, let's go back a little bit. Why don't you tell us how you started working in the performance measuring the performance environment, and how you got your first road into compliance. So just give us a little bit about how you came into working for affordable housing.
Yeah, absolutely. I started my professional career selling commodities. Funny enough, I sold gas and electricity, which led me to Yardi. Some of you may know it's a very reputable software company providing housing software. So I started out in Yardi Energy. And then when COVID hit, we developed a project based team to help state and local agencies disperse funding for the American Rescue Plan funds, right? ERAP, rental assistance, mortgage assistance, LIHEAP, LIWAP, so utility assistance across the board. It started out as we have a couple clients who need help with this. It could last 2, 3 months and then rapidly snowballed because these agencies needed to get this money out very, very quickly. So we rapidly developed some workflows. We helped with compliance, helped with HUD reporting, and we actually cut the checks and we got the money out. So 4 years later, that money has been spent for the most part. So I thought to myself, how can I carry on this good work that we've done here? And obviously, Yardi PHA has been going strong for 20 plus years. So I said, you know what? I think that's a good place for me to land.
Mhm. You and I were recently in the same room for the NARO, Washington, D.C. I think it was the legislative forum is what it was. And I was actually sitting in the audience listening to some of your personal connection with public housing. And shout out to NARO for bringing you forward so you could share because I didn't know that about your past. Would you mind sharing that for our listeners, though? Because for me, it was so impactful to hear your personal connection to public housing.
Absolutely. I actually wish I'd have gone on a little bit later in that presentation, but that's neither here nor there. So as a child, my mother, she was a single mom. We were living in Ohio. She had me and my sister, very few options. She essentially staged a sit-in at a housing authority. And she got lucky. This was before the days of online wait lists, right? I guess she was annoying enough to where they gave her a unit. And so we had somewhere to go. Um, and so that was the first, few years of my life that I can remember. My first memories were from a public housing complex. And then she married my stepdad. We moved down to Atlanta. And when I was about to graduate high school. I actually had a softball scholarship. And right before my signing date, I found out I was pregnant. And so that, of course, changed the trajectory of my life pretty significantly. I graduated high school, but I was pregnant. I walked across the graduation stage pregnant. And my parents could not afford, we came from minimal means and I needed to figure it out. I had my daughter. I applied for all of the assistance I could, and I finally came up on the wait list, and I lived in Marietta public housing for a few years while I got on my feet, and that allowed me to work, go to school, do the things that I needed to do to really get my footing in life.
Mhm. Your mom was probably, with the sit-in, that desperation of housing, I mean, not to put words into her, moment there, but sheer desperation for housing, probably she'd been waiting for somebody to call her back or process her files, and, like most moms, she was using her efficiency chip to, push things forward faster, which is
Right.
actually ironic given what you're doing right now. I mean, like, you talk about a destiny thread here. How has some of your experience affected how you approach systems efficiency or how you are approaching, reducing workflow log jams?
I think it shapes everything. Having lived it, I felt it. Um, It creates a different level of respect for the people doing this work. I think that there's like a common misconception of the people who not only live in public housing but dedicate their lives around it. In my instance, my parents met in the military. I was actually born in Belgium. These are not lazy people who are
Right.
sitting at home just, wanting a handout. I think all of us experience a time where we just need help, and so for me, I think I come with a different level of respect. And I'll tell you, having worked with market rate properties for 5 years, the challenges that face public housing authorities are not comparable, not even
Mhm. Yeah.
close. The compliance, the people, sometimes in real life crises, right? It's next level. And I think that demands a lot of patience and understanding and respect.
Well, I appreciate you sharing the authenticity and the vulnerability, if you will, about your own backstory because, we're not doing these jobs in a vacuum. Um, because, if we were just after a job, there'd be a lot easier jobs that we could find, wouldn't there be? um,
100%. Yes.
Right. But I mean, there is a connection here. There's a personal drive here in many of our backstories. So, you and I've shared about my own homelessness and some of my housing instability, and we're sharing those things um, for several reasons. I mean, it is really what's driving us, but it's also showing uh, some of the concepts that you mentioned that it's not a handout, but it truly is a moment to be a hand up, and that's that's really what's great about this industry, if we can brag on our own industry, isn't it?
Beautifully stated. I could not agree more.
I have a question though, that I'm curious. So, because I we're both moms, and, how I mean, I know I regularly tell my kids, about what I went through, what their grandparents went through, and what they don't have to go through. And they get that speech a lot. Um, do you have a similar speech that you give to your kids?
My oldest is now 22, and then I have a 4 and 5-year-old. So the 4 and 5-year-old have not been subject to the spiel just yet. But my oldest, I can tell you when I stopped giving the speech. She said to me, and this was just after she went to college. She said, "Mom," she said, "I know you're a hard worker and I have a lot of respect for you." She said, "But I need a soft life. I'm not built like that." And so she dropped out of college and went to esthetician school, and that's where we're at. So I said, "You know what? I respect the honesty, and that's where I've left it."
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting because I have a coworker of mine, Tanya Beeler, shout out to her. And she reminds me that our lived experience doesn't have to be their lived experience. And so many times I do try to layer my, whatever it was, I don't know, bootstrap survival, whatever you want to call it. I try to layer that to them. But Tanya
Yeah.
reminds me that's not always fair to do. Yeah.
Yes. Sometimes we trauma dump and we don't mean to. We're just trying to better prepare you young children. That's
Yeah.
that's all we're trying to
Yeah.
do. Yeah.
Well, both of us having come from some housing instability and some real substantial life hiccups, I think we now do sit in a chair of influence and decision making, and quite honestly, change making, to where now we can turn around and create platforms and use systems that allow people to get housed faster. So why don't you speak to that? Maybe even just start explain Yardi from scratch because not everybody who listens to us is as familiar with the Yardi platform.
Yeah, I would love to. I talk Yardi day in and day out. So, shout out to Anit Yardi, the founder of the company. He created this property management software. I believe it was to help him manage some investment properties that he had back in the mid 80s. And it's just grown from there. We're now a global property managed software management company. Roughly 10,000 employees. So, public housing is just one of the many verticals that Yardi Software supports. We also support market rate housing, commercial. Um, we've gotten into co-working space, and the list goes on and on. We could go on forever talking about all the products and services that Yardi supports. But me and my colleagues, based out of Atlanta, we are all pretty much dedicated to PHA and affordable. Um, and yeah, speaking of systems and efficiency, it is just wild to see the transformation. I think that, with the coming of AI, closed AI being implemented into our software, I think the technology, even though it's come a long way in the last 20 years, I would say in the next year is going to look incredibly different and feel incredibly different. And it's going to drive efficiencies that I don't think we thought we would have this quick. So it's going to be very interesting to see the next twelve to 24 months.
We work with a lot of housing authorities that are stuck in paper land and they're stuck in the old ways. They don't have an efficiency bend toward them. Where would you tell them to start to try to improve that? Could you give a framework for somebody who's drowning in paper?
Oh man. Um, Paper introduces two major problems, risk and delay, right? So I remember when I first started my professional career over 20 years ago, we all worked out of manila folders. Every contract, everything you were working on had its own little manila folder. You had a little sticky note. So you wrote notes on where you last left off and what you still needed to do. God forbid that sticky note falls off, and then you have to shuffle through your file again and refigure it all out. Now imagine a lost file with somebody's personal data, right? Sensitive personal data in it. It's creates security risks, the workflow bottlenecks and n- zero audit trail. Nowadays, things are becoming very judicial. I was
Mhm.
talking to some agencies where they're saying their residents are using chat gpt to represent themselves. Yes, and so I think now more than ever you need that audit trail. You need to
Mm.
know who did what in the system and when they did it, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, moving to more digital systems doesn't just make things faster, which faster is great. It makes them, safer and holds
Mm.
people more accountable.
Yeah. Let's talk about that faster component because that is a common complaint about the industry is that it takes so long.
Mhm.
Whatever it is, like whatever however you define it, is that a unit inspected? Is that somebody coming off the waiting list? Like whatever the piece in the process. But let's talk about how systems can actually make something faster. Like what does that look like in your world?
Yeah, absolutely. I always tell people if I never had to run another Excel file, do another pivot table or VLOOKUP again in my life, I would not cry about it. I would say it's those monotonous, redundant tasks that bog us down when we don't have automation. And so, having a system in place that understands your compliance needs, where you have canned reporting, where you can just pull a report and
Mhm.
you can trust the data is correct because you have that centralized data repository is very important. Because at the end of the day, paper stacks up. It just equates to delays. When there are delays, that yields frustrated residents. When residents are frustrated, staff is frustrated. And then when staff is frustrated, the agency is overwhelmed. So
Mhm.
it's all very interconnected.
Mhm.
They say happy wife, happy life. It's really like happy residents, healthier agencies
Right.
is what it is.
Right. We mentioned that it reduces risk. We said it prevents delay, audit trail safer, that automation, increased access. There's another thing that I believe is happening too is transparency. You guys, with some of your platforms and some of your dashboards and reports, actually improve the transparency aspect of the process, where
Mhm.
things are. Explain what that looks like for a user, for a housing authority, even for a resident. What is transparency doing when people move through the automation?
Yeah, I'll give you two examples. From a resident perspective, I mean, I remember being on a wait list. I cannot tell you how many times I called that agency to see where I was on the waiting list, right? Now through our platform, every resident has a login. They can see exactly where they're at on a wait list. They can see exactly what documentation they're missing, what they'd need to research. All of the things are out there and visible to them at any time. Because not only that, you don't always have time in a day to check on things. Sometimes you're in bed at night, doom scrolling, and you're saying, "Okay, it's time to check on this thing."
Mhm.
Um, the other example that I would give, I'm gonna go back to, what we called our relief suite during COVID. It was a very sensitive time. We were working primarily with community action agencies, but it was built on the same platform that our newest Voyager version for PHA is on. And that's like the Angular layout, where, like you said, you have these very easy to read, visible dashboards. So if you're an executive director, you're going to log in and your role and permissions is going to allow you to see everything, what everybody's working on, where you're at with all of your metrics. And
Mhm.
during COVID, the community action agencies were dealing with that and they were under a microscope. There was so much money flowing to states at the time and people really needed help. I mean, it was scary for everyone. And so you know, I was talking to some leaders and they're like, I'm so glad that I can log in and see how many applications we have in the queue, see how many payments we've processed within the month, because I'm getting calls from newspapers and, I'm having press call, like just the wildest things. And they were like, I need to have this data at, the drop of a hat.
Yep.
And they had it available to them. And I think the same principle can be applied to public housing. You need information. The way
Mhm.
society is, it just moves so quickly. You need to be able to access high level data that's easily digestible. I don't want to force you to download an Excel file and have you make sense of it. You should just be able to easily review the things that you need to see, and
Right.
that be the end. Yeah.
And from the housing authority's perspective, you don't want somebody, the one person, to have the spreadsheet that gets updated in a random file that's not with a click that's in the system, too. So, like that transparency, that real time awareness of what's happening in the process is so crucial. It makes me think, Jeff Bischoff and I were just on a panel recently, and we were talking about, actually this 24/7 access to information, and I'm curious from your perspective, what are you guys doing that is the biggest opportunity for innovation right now? how would you describe that moment?
I hate to sound repetitive because I feel like these 2 words are the only 2 words floating around in society right now, but it's artificial intelligence. Um, the probabilistic decision trees being, integrated into every platform that we offer is, like I said, it's truly going to be a game changer. Next year, software with Yardi at least, will not look the same, will not operate the same. It's going to free up a lot of time for a lot of people, which I love because I think people can go from using brain power for these very redundant, repetitive tasks and start really thinking critically and creatively about other ways that they can improve their resident experience. I was
Mhm.
talking to an executive director last week at the Moving to Work conference, and they're light years ahead of everyone. They're already implementing. He said, and I was asking him what his plan was because it was going to free up resources. He said, "I'm creating a call center. There are going to be questions that our chatbot's unable to answer. And, some of the circumstances and situations for our residents are very complex and they need individualized attention. And we'll finally be prepared to have people available to answer phone calls. When's the last time you called somewhere and somebody actually picked up a phone, right? So it's incredible to me.
So speak to that because so many people say AI is going to reduce the job count, and but yet from what I'm hearing you say and from this conversation is you actually can reprioritize resources to other areas. Is that what you view as one of the wins as incorporating AI?
Oh, 100%. I've talked to a lot of agencies and a lot of agent and not just EDs, the staff, they have these incredible ideas on things that they can do in their communities, whether it be to help the elderly population or help the youth. You know, y- and they're always like crock pot ideas, something that we've thought of now we'll actually do later and nobody ever gets to doing it because everybody's always so busy. This is gonna free up the time to actually do the thing. Going back to that critical thinking, like shifting the way people think about their jobs. Jobs, when they're redundant, can get very boring, but when you allow people to be creative, I think that brings a lot of excitement back into work.
Mhm. Imagine more robust recruitment for landlords coming into the program or more robust programs for family self-sufficiency, which sometimes autopilot right now because people are so worried about compliance and moving the
Yes.
process through. But, if you free up resources from moving files and paper around and compliance check boxes, and you go over here into more deeper user experiences, you really could change the program, couldn't you?
Oh, 100%. And last week, hot topic of conversation, shortfall.
Mhm.
And I'm speaking on these MTW agencies specifically. They have so much freedom and flexibility to get creative and just not enough time to actually put the thought into it and to network with other agencies and to share ideas.
Mhm.
And, I think that's another opportunity to resolve some outstanding issues in the industry.
And you have a group of leaders and housing authorities who are rushing towards solutions. They have some regulatory flexibility, like the MTW, but then you have a few that are not either size or scope, don't have the ability to surge. But then you've got a whole bunch in the middle who have been a little slower to adopt technology. What would you say, in your opinion, is why the industry is a little slower to adopt technology? Is there a generalization there, or is it just case by
Yeah,
case?
it's a great question. 2 things, time and money, right? A software implementation. First, to purchase software, it costs money. It's an investment, but it's also an investment in time, which can be 6 to 12 months, sometimes longer. shameless plug, we recently rolled out an expedited implementation product. So if you guys are interested, please come talk to us. But going back to the impact on agencies, the best analogy that I've ever heard, shout out to Jonathan Young, it's a military analogy. And it's, you know, you have a young man or a young person, a recruiter goes to them and sells them on joining the military, right? Everything sounds good. They take the ASVAB, they pass the ASVAB, and they're really excited. They go to boot camp. Boot camp is the exact opposite of everything that they were sold, and they are in the mud, and they're dirty, and they're tired, and they're getting yelled at, and it is chaos. But if they persevere and put in the time, they graduate from boot camp, they get placed into their permanent role, they get the GI Bill, they get, a steady paycheck that they don't have to worry about, and that's what I'd equate pretty closely to a software implementation. It's like short-term pain, long-term gain, but that long-term gain can be a huge gain.
Yeah, that's a great analogy, actually, where it's like, go through it. On the other side, there'll be some wins. Just get through it. Oh my goodness. So that does lead when we talk about software transitions. I mean, usually it is scarier on the front side. It's a little bit of a horror show in the middle, but maybe horror show is too extreme of a word. But that also is like the human nature piece of it more than the actual task or the technology. So, speaking on that human nature side, like we're afraid of what we don't know, right? How do you speak to teams to get them through a transition? How do you speak to teams when they are used to doing something a very certain way?
That is a great question. Everybody has something in their daily work that they just cannot stand doing, right? There's the one thing that takes hours and hours every month. And usually that thing is something that software can solve for. So, I go in and sometimes it's difficult to pull that out, right? Because like you
Mhm.
said, people don't know what they don't know.
Right.
So it's asking questions like, well, tell me how you're using spreadsheets, tell me what you're doing to try to sift out the manual processes. And eventually it comes out. And when you can tell them, if you say, well, if you can stick with me over the next few months and we can get you trained on this system, and I can promise that this thing that took you 10 hours a
Yeah.
week is going to be automated, like, can we do
Right.
this thing? And most of the time you'll get their buy-in. The hard part is trying to figure out what that thing is for each department within an agency. Because even, agencies are so unique in that you could have 2 agencies in a close geographic proximity, but they're serving 2 completely different, populations with very different programs. And then within those agencies, you have your, operations, maintenance, finance, and you could have 2 of those, departments doing just fine, and one of them really struggling, and so you're adopting this platform to solve for one thing. So how do you sell the other 2 that say, "You know what? I've been doing the same thing for 20, 30 years. Why should I change now?"
Mhm.
So it is, getting to the bottom of the things they're spending their time on that they may not love to do and just solving for it.
Mhm. And it's weird because we're talking about human nature. If you've always known that you click screen 3, 2, 1, 1, and you go through it. You know what report is going to work, what isn't, and then you're taking all of that away and replacing it with I don't even, where do I start? Like where do I click? What do I know? Like there is this human component of it, but we are not normally trained to look for the wins. Like, we're not normally trained to look for the hero moment. We're not normally trained to say, "What is gonna be so much better that I didn't even realize I was overcompensating by making my own homemade spreadsheet or whatever it is. And I think that is the interesting thing about technology is that, we didn't even know we wanted to book an airline ticket on our phone. We thought going into the travel agent's office and waiting in line and, going through we thought that was how we were supposed to do it. We didn't
Yeah.
even know we wanted to book our own tickets. So,
Yeah.
I think that is sort of that look for the win moment we didn't know we needed when it comes to technology.
Could not agree more. And, going back to those hero moments, they happened, they were there, but it was like you said, identifying them was difficult because the data wasn't there, right? It's like the thing happened and you're going on people's words, but where's the data to prove it, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yep.
now, digitizing everything and having data sort of tell the story is very powerful, very
Mhm.
powerful.
Yeah, I just made a couple of, posts on LinkedIn, and I had really a lot of fun with it, but I was saying that one of the most dangerous things in housing is hearing, "We've always done it this way." And I actually had fun because everybody hears, "We've always done it this way," or the inverse, "We've never done it like that." And those can be really operationally, dangerous when you think about it. Do you have a favorite story of where you've combated some of that?
I will say I've been at the receiving end of that thought process of the way we've always done things, and it was not fun for me. It was not pleasant. The people at the housing authority, I remember them being great, but I remember having to choose. I was applying not only for housing, I was applying for SNAP, I was applying for TANF. Each one of those things was a different state agency, a different place I had to physically go to submit an
Oh,
application.
yeah.
So it was, do I call off work again? Do I really need yes, I do really need this thing. I got to figure it out. You get there, you're missing documentation. Well, got to
Yep,
reschedule,
yep.
right? So the way that we've always done things is not necessarily the best way to do things.
Mhm,
And I bring up that example every single time.
mhm. And, when you think about working families, there's y you know, you don't want to have to create that friction moment related to housing stability. Like, when you are concerned if your paperwork got submitted and you may lose your housing. Immediate tension and friction. It hits at a core of a person's whole being if you're like, oh my gosh, I just got a non-compliance notice. This is my first notice. Or, all of those scenarios. But when you're working with technology and you're working in a portal that you guys have, that you can actually pull it up, you can see where it is, what's submitted, what's not. And it reduces some of that friction there, just by having access to information. And then, that's not just for the participant, it's for the landlord and, some examples that you mentioned as far as executive leadership and community and so forth. Um, so, there's a lot more work to be done though, because this isn't the standard and the norm for everybody, is it?
Oh, absolutely not.
What is it that you guys are doing that's so much better than, anything else. Like, what can you give secret sauce? We're not asking code. But
Yeah.
what
So,
is it that you
well,
guys do that's so much better?
and I, oh, well, the software, like, you can put our GL accounting software up against any competitor, and our founder is the most humble, wonderful human being on the planet. So he does not like when we boast about things. But I'm going to boast for a second because, um, you know, the accounting capabilities are unmatched, and the way that we prioritize um our clients and our communities, I think, is unmatched as well. A lot of our development is driven off of client need and client suggestions. We don't just take stabs in the dark at what we think clients might want. We listen to their needs and we develop from there. So that's one thing. But two, and I hate to keep going back to this AI thing, but it's a thing. Kind of going back to your last statement, the real impact to human beings is, that an agency will be able to upload into their closed environment, all of their processes and procedures and requirements, everything will be there. It's going to be reading everything. So, in that instance where a resident gets a notification and is startled by it, they'll be able to go in and ask the agent and just say, "I got this. What do I do?" And it's going to give them step-by-step instructions. It could be in the middle of the night, but they're going to be getting guidance so that they can sleep a little bit better. Right? That's the real human impact, and what does that also do? It relieves some of the pressure from the agency as well, right? So I'm very excited to see how we evolve, integrating AI. I think we're at the frontier, especially in, public housing, and, I'm just very excited. Everybody will have to join us, this fall or next spring at a conference, and we'll be ready to show everyone.
You guys have been giving sneak peek previews of what you're doing in the AI space, and, a lot of people are watching from the sidelines, and a lot of people are, tapping on their watch and ready to launch with you. What do is this the initiative that's giving you the most hope as far as, technology advancements, or do you have others?
It's definitely what's giving me the most hope, and it's one of those things. I'm conflicted personally about AI. I will tell you, I'm a bit of an environmentalist. There's a strain environmentally. There's now, some of the LLM leaders are sort of combating each other. It's kind of become a weird political thing. And Sam Altman is sort of a figure that, you hate him or love him, but he said
Right.
something that really stuck with me. And I actually agree with. He said, AI will not replace humans, but humans who don't use AI will
Mm.
be replaced by those who do. And I feel that in my core. I follow technology. I see that. And I think that's a very real statement,
Mhm.
you know?
Well, pioneers and innovators sometimes they get the villain chair, until all of a sudden the waves come through and everybody goes, "Oh, okay. Well,
It's true.
it did work and it was beneficial." And it also gives the other industries a chance to speed up, like the infrastructure and some of those other utility conversations that are happening. Um, you know, the tech is running faster than some of those other industries can catch up right now. So, when you think of even burying fiber lines, that used to not ever happen anywhere. And now neighborhoods are like, absolutely, we're not turning dirt until there's lines buried. And so utility infrastructure takes a few minutes to catch up with the technology in some cases. So this is a good conversation. I mean, just when I was in college, I don't even think there was anything to Google. I don't think there was Google. And, when I think there were like certain things that, I had to like flip through, the dictionary, right?
Yeah,
Like
the encyclopedias, the Encyclopedia Britannica.
right, I
Oh,
mean, like, so this is a whole nother world that we've just moved through, and, and it is kind of funny because I talk to my kids and I'm like, there wasn't even Google around, like, back in my day, and so, here we're talking about all of these other, platforms that we can access information, the power of it, the convenience of it, and then, we do wanna consider the cost and the risk as well. So, we've covered a lot here. Is there something else that maybe we've missed that you, would wanna to add on?
the last thing I think I'll mention that we haven't talked about is the increasing need of affordable housing. I live in Atlanta, and I've seen the growth. I've also seen a lot of displaced people, and I don't have the data, I don't have the metrics, but I can tell you what I see and what I feel. I've grown up and lived in the same area pretty much my whole life, and when I go to these same grocery stores, I'm starting to see people who are clearly living in their cars, right? They're parked in the back and they have all their stuff, and it just feels to me that the need is growing. So I'm just so grateful that there are people like you in this industry, so many thought leaders. Seeing you speak on panels at conferences is just one of my highlights. And there are so many others who have just dedicated their lives to this mission, and that's what we need. We need more of this, not less.
Yep.
And just all the more reason to take in and adopt those efficiencies when and where you can, because the need is not going away. It's just increasing.
I appreciate that because you're right. Anytime we can grab the microphone to continue to advocate for the need and to continue to advocate how many different solutions there are, as fragmented as they are, are still solutions. So we owe it to so many people to not just kind of shrug our shoulders and hope it gets better, but we do need to roll up our sleeves. We need to grab the microphones. We need to keep being champions of affordable housing. And I'll I'll just be real honest with you here. It is not easy grabbing the microphone. It is not easy continuing to stay in this moment of championing, a cause that is difficult. And the regulations are complex. The funding every year you have to justify. Sometimes the buildings aren't great, right? Sometimes they need more work than they have money for. And to work in that kind of an ecosystem, it's hard. And but there there are ways for improvement. There are ways to do this better. There are ways to be good stewards of the money, and, you know, we can keep leasing as many vouchers as we can get, can't we? Because the need is there.
It is, and I'm just cheers to grabbing microphones, friend. Well
Let's
said.
let's do that, let's cheers to grabbing our microphones right here, why
Cheers.
won't we?
I don't have a microphone, but
We'll keep
I'll
fumbling
use yours.
along and grabbing the microphone though, won't we?
That's right. That's right. That's amazing.
Well, I appreciate you. Again, I've been talking with Shaina Fite, the Public Housing Authority Manager with Yardi. Appreciate your time, appreciate what you guys are doing, and keep us moving forward with technology options. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Katie.
Thanks for listening to ChangeMakers with Katie Goar. To find out more about Katie, go to quadel.com. That's QUADEL.com. This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio.